Welcome. My name is Brent Iverson. I'm the Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies, and it is my great honor to host this year's University Lecture Series. Okay, I want to start by saying the following. The University of Texas at Austin. What am I supposed to say next? You have confirmed that those millions of advertising dollars have gone to good use. What starts here changes the world. What I want to do is I want to start with just the first three words and then add a question mark. What starts here? What starts here? You. You're freshmen. You start here. You, and I'm telling you the truth, are going to go off and do fantastic things, and you will change the world. I would imagine at least one of you is going to go off and start a great company. One of you is going to create Pokemon Go 2. You're going to sell it at the peak of its popularity. You're going to make $1 billion, and then you're going to retire at age 27. And then that same person is going to give half of that money to the School of Undergraduate Studies at UT Austin. I mean, I can dream too. But seriously, you are going to go off and do great things. But I want to ask that question again, and I want another interpretation. What starts here? And the answer is ideas. Ideas start here that do change the world. And tonight, we are going to hear from three people who have had ideas that are changing the world. They have impact in fields as diverse as the arts, science and technology, and the social sciences. But before I introduce them, I want to point out that we're trying something new. And that is, we're going to ask you to provide questions that I'm going to ask them at the end, either individually or as a group. And you do that by using the same Twitter account that you were using to answer the trivia questions. It's going to be listed at the bottom of everybody's slide. So during the presentations, fire the questions in, and then I'm going to get them, and I'll be asking them your questions at the end. Okay. Our first speaker tonight is Professor Charles Anderson. Professor Anderson is a choreographer, a dancer, as well as the founder and artistic director of the critically acclaimed Dance Theater X. In addition, Professor Anderson has had his artistic achievements recognized nationally and internationally, and his work with undergraduate students has twice been nationally showcased at the Kennedy Center. That is impact. He was also selected among the 25 to watch by Dance Magazine. Dr. Anderson?
Hello. So I'm going to start by explaining a couple of things. I'm not thinking I'm in Miami Vice. I'm going to dance for you a little later, so you're going to see me do a strip show in a second. So start there. And you're going to also see me using my phone because I'll go off on a tangent if I don't have some way of remembering what it is I'm trying to say to you. So I'm not texting, I promise. I'm going to just look at it once in a while. And then lastly, I absolutely hate speaking in public, so tell me to speak up if I start mumbling, because that could happen in any moment. So when Dean Iverson first approached me about speaking here, I had just learned about the shooting deaths of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. And I find it certainly ironic that I'm here speaking to you today, as I have just found out about the deaths of Terence Crutcher. And I'm starting there because that, in many ways, is part of the work that I do as an artist. Originally, I titled this talk, Black Arts Matter, and that's because, in many ways, that is the philosophy and foundation of what it is that I do. It is informed by what I call the African diaspora, I'm a contemporary choreographer. However, I have a minor in Africana Studies from Cornell University, and my graduate work centered around the traditions of performance throughout Africa, South America, and the United States. Here at the University of Texas, that's why I got hired. This was the first institution that I had seen that was advertising for a contemporary performer who actually worked in the African diaspora, and that to me was truly exciting. And I joined the faculty here as 50% appointment in African and African diaspora studies and 50% in theater and dance. As of last year, I became the head of the dance program, and now am fully in the College of Fine Arts. But I also like to just mention, I started out as an undergrad studying mechanical engineering until I went to a party and discovered I could dance. So there's hope for you all. I wanted to start off by, and I have a clicker too. Oh God, hold on. I just realized I have too many things in my hand, so let's try this. So, oh, it worked. So this man, when in high school, I, like many of you, was taking an American literature course, and I read a book by James Baldwin called Go Tell It on the Mountain, which truly resonated with me because it reminded me of my own upbringing in Richmond, Virginia. I'm the first person in my family to attend college, like many of you, I'm sure, and I really did not have much exposure to intellectual discourse until late in high school when I transferred to a college prep program. And reading his book changed my life, and I let it go. I was going to be an engineer. That was a nice moment. I was moving on. Then I went to college, and then, you know, there's those required courses. And so like any diligent grade-grubbing student, I just looked for the best class that I thought I could get the easy A in, and I saw a class on James Baldwin, and I took it. And it changed my life. I read more of his work and his nonfiction work, which was almost prophetic in its understanding of what we're experiencing right now. And to be honest, it was through writing about his work that my professors encouraged me to start looking at other fields outside of engineering, which is how I ended up in Africana Studies. You're going to hear me mention a few times this word, the diaspora, and I wanted to make sure we understood what that means. So essentially, the African diaspora is speaking about African peoples who originated from the continent of Africa and find themselves in other parts of the world, and the retention of certain aspects of Africanist cultures. As I think most of us know, there are over 2,000 ethnic groups or languages in Africa, and it is not a country, it is actually comprised of numerous countries. And when you start to look throughout the world, you start to see many derivations of those cultures. My work actually has me centered primarily in the United States, and most centrally, I'm so losing at the clicker. Hold on, let's see. There you go. Most of my work centers on the rural United States, southern United States, where I'm from, and particularly the dances that came out of the era of slavery and Reconstruction. And many of those dances, particularly those that you can still find throughout the South, and particularly in Louisiana, have very strong connections to traditional African forms throughout West Africa. Moving on. You're also going to hear me talk about this word aesthetics, and I'm not going to read it to you. I just want you to know that when I'm talking about aesthetics today particularly, I'm really just talking about the ways of evaluating. Evaluative ways of thinking. And what I mean by that is the idea that the way something looks isn't just our opinion or our feeling. That's actually informed by the culture and our backgrounds and our way of understanding the world through our own socio-political identities. So you'll hear me use it. So as I was saying, my work particularly centers around the period of slavery as well as the early 20th century and late 20th century African American dance forms. In the United States, we actually have a number of African cultures that have informed our own culture. In one of the first dances that is truly called African American was born out of slavery, called the ring shout, which you'll see a little bit of later. I put this slide up here just because of the irony of being in this building. One of my first performances here at the University of Texas was called Restless Natives, which was inspired by James Baldwin's novel Another Country. And it was one of the first times that I truly started to work with my upbringing. And the realization that I had been dancing all my life, even though I hadn't taken a dance class before I was 19 years old. And so I created an entire piece based around my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, one could call him, who ran what they call a juke joint and sold what we call moonshine. And the fact that he actually taught me a great deal about music and rhythms because he also played blues guitar. So you're going to see a little bit of that too. I'm going to keep moving. As Dean Iverson mentioned, I have a dance company called Dance Theater X. That X represents a variety of things. One, my love of the X as a variable. My love of the fact that I am Generation X, not baby boomer or millennial, but Generation X. You forget about us, but we exist. And also my love of the writings of Malcolm X. And particularly, this poem was inspired by Malcolm X. It was written by another amazing poet that I encountered in college named Essex Hemphill. Short excerpt of it, because I'm sure half of you can't read it, is, I want to start an organization to save my life. If whales, snails, dogs, cats, Chrysler, and Nixon can be saved, the lives of black men are priceless and can be saved. I am not concerned about the attire of a soldier. All I want to know for my own protection is, are we capable of whatever, whenever? This was written in 1989, well before Alton or Philando or Terrence, and well after Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and numerous others, as well as my own great-grandfather who was lynched. So, moving on. What informs both my artistic practice and my scholarship is this concept called liberatory aesthetics. What I mean by liberatory aesthetics is simply the fact that it is work that is based on the idea of staying true to and resistant to simultaneously. So in other words, the idea is, if I am practicing ballet, I'm going to stay true to that tradition. However, I'm going to be resistant of the cultural mores that actually negate my opportunity to participate in it. So, in other words, my work operates in what we call the in-between spaces, the marginal spaces, the intersectional spaces. If you ever take a class with me, we'll talk more. I'm not going to read this to you, but I thought it was important to mention the fact, a definition of liberation, both the undoing of the effects and the elimination of the causes of social oppression. The achievement of human liberation on a global scale will require far-reaching changes at the institutional level and at the level of group and individual interactions. These changes involve transforming oppressive behavioral patterns and unlearning oppressive attitudes and assumptions. Essentially, what that's getting at is not taking anything for granted, making the familiar unfamiliar, and realizing that there's always another perspective, even if you believe yours is the correct one. And that is what makes us a human community. Oppositionally speaking, there is the oppression, the systematic and pervasive mistreatment, disenfranchisement of individuals on the basis of their membership in various groups which are disadvantaged by the institutionalized imbalances in social power in a particular society. And it goes on. In other words, liberatory aesthetics is invested in fighting oppression. And I say that because most of my students are not actually of African descent, and it's important that they understand, and I think I remember that this work isn't about white people bad, black people good, or anything of that nature. It has to do with the fact of trying to undo certain systemic patterns that don't allow us to understand that there is only one race, the human race, and therefore all of the other stuff that we put on it is coming from histories, systems, ideologies that aren't necessarily serving that greater understanding that will ultimately, I hope we all realize, keep us all in better shape. But, you know. A lot of my particular work came out of my graduate study at Temple University, where many could say Afrocentricity was born. I particularly was fond of Hoyt Fuller, who was an artist and a thinker during the 1970s during what is called the Black Power movement, which came after the Civil Rights movement. What I found most fascinating about him was his understanding of this idea of universalism. It's that term that we often use, like I want, as an artist especially, I want my work to be universal. I want it to be felt by us all. And then there's that interesting moment where you realize, well, we're not all the same, so I'm not sure how you make something universal. However, it is a term that actually is valorized, and actually, particularly in my field, it is the desired norm. However, there's an issue with that term, as Hoyt Fuller brought up. The notions of universalism have been used against black art as a way to legitimate its marginalization. He goes on to say, certainly the argument might proceed to be important. Writing must have universal values, universal implications. It cannot deal exclusively with Negro problems. This was in the 70s. The plain but unstated assumption being, of course, that there are no universal values and no universal implications in Negro life. That obviously is a fallacy, particularly for us in this country, because most of our culture is informed by the relationship between European and Africanist cultures. Therefore, black art matters. Moving on. So he used Shakespeare as an example, and I love me some Shakespeare, so don't think I'm trying to bash Shakespeare. He speaks about the most powerful of his statements about the paradox of universalism is his comment on a poem by Joseph Bevins Bush. He says that the poem lacks the resonances of William Shakespeare, that is intentional. The great bard of Avon has only limited relevance to the revolutionary spirit raging in the ghetto, which is not to say that black revolutionaries reject universal statements inherent in Shakespeare's work. What they do reject, however, is the literary assumption that the style and language and the concerns of Shakespeare establish the appropriate limits and frame of reference for black poetry and people. So in other words, what he's getting at is Shakespeare's cool and all, but you know, he's not probably going to be able to appeal to people who have not necessarily grown up in a culture where how he speaks and what he speaks about is in any way related to their lives. So there's an irony to that, because I bet even if we don't like it, we all know hip hop, so there's a universality in there. I'm gonna jump for a second to this one last one, the liberatory voice, which is ultimately the foundation of my teaching philosophy, is characterized by opposition, by resistance. It demands that paradigm shift, that we learn to talk, to listen, to hear in new ways. And that's a quote by Bell Hooks from her book, Teaching to Transgress. So with that being said, I'm going to do something for you called a testimony. And it's part of what I actually teach in my composition class. It's a short performance in a postmodern idiom. And the only thing I'm going to do is move with the music and let you make your own judgments from there. If I can find it. There it is. Oh, no, there it is. Okay.
Because I always feel like running, not away, because there's no such place. Because if there was, I would have found it by now. Because it's easier to run, easier than staying and finding out you're the only one who didn't run. Because running will be the way your life and mine will be described, as in the long run, or as in having given someone a run for his money, or as in running out of time. Because running makes me look like everyone else, though I hope there will never be cause for that. Because I will be running in the other direction, not running for cover. Because if I knew where cover was, I would stay there and never have to run for it. Not running for my life, because I have to be running for something of more value to be running and not in fear. Because the thing I fear cannot be escaped, eluded, avoided, hidden from, protected from, gotten away from, not without showing the fear as I see it now. Because closer, clearer, closer, nearer, because of you, and because of that nice that you quietly, quickly be causing, and because you're going to see me run soon, and because you're going to know why I'm running then, you'll know then, because I'm not going to tell you now.
Great job.
Thank you.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce somebody I have known here at the University of Texas at Austin for 26 years. We work closely together in the laboratory and on a lot of other projects. And I'll tell you that when I think of Dr. Georgiou, one word comes to mind, and that word is brilliant. Dr. Georgiou is not only a wonderful engineer, he's also a member of the College of Natural Sciences. At a time when an entire life is summed up by being elected to a national academy, Dr. Georgiou is not only a member of the National Academy of Engineering, he is also a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He is the co-inventor of 87 issued US patents, 87, 65% of which have been licensed to over 27 pharmaceutical companies. In 2013, Nature Biotechnology selected Professor Georgiou as one of the top 20 translational researchers. It is my indeed pleasure to introduce Dr. Georgiou.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I have to say, though, how can I possibly follow up in the footsteps of a dancer? I'm a scientist and therefore a geek. So I can only tell you about my personal story, because if you told me when I was at your age that I would be talking to 2,000 students and somebody would be praising my accomplishments and I would be living in Austin, Texas, I would probably ask that person for whatever weed they were smoking. So it's true. Now, I came here by accident, literally. I've been here for 30 years. I love this university. I think it's an amazing place, not because somebody actually paid me to say this, but because I really came here not expecting to stay at UT Austin for 30 years. Let me back up for 2 minutes because it's an entertaining story. I am from Greece originally. I did my undergraduate studies in England. Then I met a girl. The girl was about to do her graduate studies at Cornell. There was no Google. I applied to the one school I knew in New York, which is, Columbia. She was at Columbia. But I applied to Cornell because I thought Cornell is in New York City. And then I found out that Cornell is not in New York City. It's in the middle of nowhere. And that's where I did my PhD. Honest to God, it's a true story. So after I finished my PhD, I was looking for a job, and my graduate advisor told me, well, down there in Texas, actually they have a very good university. And I thought, no way I'm going to go to Texas, because at that time, the only thing I knew about Texas was Dallas, the TV show, and it didn't look that exciting. And then I came here, and I really fell in love with Austin and the university, and because of the nature of my work, it so happened that there were many opportunities to move to other institutions, several Ivy League schools, most of the private schools in California. But I always decided that this is the place for me, and this is because this university offers the right intersection of creating new ideas and tolerance. What keeps Austin weird keeps the university a very fertile place for new ideas. So now back to the science, because that's what I need to talk to you about. What I do is discover protein drugs and then develop protein drugs. We're interested in protein therapeutics, and I have a strong passion for protein therapeutics. Now, proteins are large drugs. You have to inject them to a patient. You cannot take them orally because they're destroyed in your stomach. Proteins are very complex drugs, and the reason why we care so much about them is because they're extremely specific and they can perform different functions with a precision that really cannot be matched by all the other drugs that we use for therapeutic purposes. Currently, protein drugs represent about roughly 2.5% of the GDP of this country in terms of value, and they employ about 600,000 people just in the manufacturing and the discovery of these drugs. But of course, numerous lives have been saved and are being saved every year because of protein drugs. And even more importantly, in this day and age, especially since 2 or 3 years ago, there have been incredible advances in the way we can treat cancer with new protein drugs that unleash the power of our immune system to fight cancer and win. And in fact, some of you may already know that currently we have the ability to cure, I repeat, cure about 20% of the patients that have been diagnosed with metastatic melanoma, a disease that would otherwise kill you in 6 months. So please, don't stay in the sun without sunscreen. Metastatic melanoma is really a bad disease. So the success we have had as a community, not in our lab, with metastatic melanoma would like to extend to other incurable diseases. Also, we'd like to be able to make vaccines for diseases which are emerging and for which are becoming more apparent, Zika being a very good example currently. Now, what do we do at UT? What do we do in our lab? In our lab, we discover and we develop 2 kinds of therapeutic proteins. There are, roughly speaking, 3 classes of therapeutic proteins. One of them is hormones. Insulin, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is a hormone. The second class of therapeutic proteins is antibodies. Antibodies are what your immune system uses to recognize foes, recognize pathogenic agents, and then target them and destroy them. So we actually now can make antibodies in the laboratory so that they can bind to a particular pathogenic cell and either recruit other components of the immune system or simply by binding to the pathogenic cell in a particular way, deactivate the cell. In fact, work that we did with Professor Iverson and also Professor Jennifer Maynard, a former graduate student who, like the rest of us, left Austin only to come back, and she's a professor now in engineering. The 3 of us co-invented a drug for inhalation anthrax, the terrorist agent that was used for the 2001 attacks, which is now an approved product. So antibodies are one class of drugs. The other class of drugs that our lab somewhat has pioneered are enzyme drugs, engineered enzyme drugs. What do I mean by enzymes and what do I mean by engineered? Enzymes are catalysts. They perform chemical reactions. Engineered means that these are proteins that are not the same as the proteins that your body makes, but they're tweaked in some way so that we can endow them with the proper pharmacological properties. What do we mean by that? We mean the right function, that they persist in the body for a long time, that they go to the right organ, and so on and so forth. Specifically, we have engineered several enzymes which catalyze reactions that are critical for cancer treatment and also for the treatment of certain inborn errors of metabolism. Let's start with a second example. One disease that we are working on, we have engineered the enzyme, is now being evaluated in patients, is a disease where patients cannot metabolize a particular amino acid. The amino acid is called arginine. The patients have huge levels of arginine in the body, and for reasons that we do not completely understand, these patients develop spasticity. They have severe developmental defects and mental defects, and eventually they die before the age of 30 from liver complications and other complications. It's a rare disease, but it's a very devastating disease for the patients and, of course, for their families. And additionally, the cost of caring for these patients can be exorbitant, as you can imagine. So we engineered an enzyme. The enzyme is called arginase because it breaks down arginine, and ase is the suffix that we attach to different chemicals when we talk about the respective enzyme. So we engineered an arginase that can now normalize the level of arginine in the blood of these patients. And we hope, and there is actually a lot of data to support this, that by this method, by injecting patients once a week with this drug, they can have more or less normal metabolism and as a result be able to live a productive life. The second application of another enzyme that we're very excited about is an anti-cancer enzyme, so an enzyme to fight cancer. It turns out, and this is actually very important to keep in mind, so people tell you that, oh, you know, if you have cancer, you should start drinking and eating antioxidants, which is blatantly wrong. If you don't have cancer, then antioxidants are very helpful because a lot of oxidation can cause cancer. But cancer cells are highly oxidized. They are basically, in some ways, rusting away. It's just that they have the mechanisms to prevent damage to the cell because of the high level of oxidation that occurs. However, if you stress them a little bit more, then the cancer cells will die. Now, in order for the cancer cells to avoid being destroyed by the excess oxidative stress, by the excess oxidation, they have to take up from the blood, they parasitize us, as cancers do, and they take from the blood amino acids that are critical for antioxidant responses. And what we did is engineer an enzyme that now can destroy that amino acid. It's called cysteine. And by destroying cysteine in the blood, the cancer is deprived by its essential source of antioxidants. And in that way, in that manner, the cancer cells die quite efficiently. It doesn't, or not quite efficiently, very efficiently and very effectively. Of course, it doesn't work for every cancer, but for several cancers that we've evaluated in animal models, which is part of what we do, it actually works remarkably well. And this is another enzyme that's about to be tested in patients. Now, engineering proteins is a complex endeavor because every protein has thousands of atoms, and you have to engineer the right kind of atom in the right place to have the proper properties. Some of it is trial and error, some of it is intuition, a lot of it is hard work. But once you engineer a protein, there are many other things that you have to do in order to eventually benefit patients. So what are those things? Well, first, let's say that you have a protein, let's say you have an enzyme that can degrade antioxidants, which is what we wanted to do. Well, let's say you accomplish that. Now you have to make it stable enough so that it stays in circulation for a long time, because you don't want to be hooked to a machine that infuses enzyme on you all throughout your life. That's not feasible. Second, it has to go to the right places in the body, right? Third, you have to be able to produce it, because if you can't produce a drug in an economical way, and economical is relative, we're not talking about something cheap here, but at least something that's meaningful from a societal perspective, then obviously you do not have a product that can benefit society. Then you have to test this compound, this enzyme, in animals. That's the only way we know to test drugs and make sure that they perform what they are expected to perform. So if you cure mice from tumors, then there's a possibility that you will cure humans from tumors. Then, after you do that, you have to work with other groups. You have to work with the business community to raise the money, and it requires tens of millions of dollars to raise the money to be able to carry out the entire process of validation and critical testing that is required for the Food and Drug Administration approval. Often you hear people whining about the Food and Drug Administration and the bureaucracy, but believe me, before the Food and Drug Administration or before there were methods in place to allow a very rigorous examination of drugs, people died all the time, and people can still die occasionally because something was overseen. When a drug eventually goes through clinical trials, and the Food and Drug Administration has to evaluate the entire package, everything that has happened in that drug, all the records of how it was produced, what experiments were done, what side effects there were. Typically, at least until 3 years ago, sometimes the government is not very quick, as you know, the amount of information that was required for these filings was approximately 2 to 3 18-wheelers full with documents. So people had to evaluate all that information to eventually reach a decision as to whether this drug will be beneficial and can be acceptable and can be approved. All these processes are very expensive. And as a scientist, if you're interested in doing something that will be of benefit to humanity, I think it's part of your obligation to work with everybody else in this ecosystem, with the business community, with the clinicians, and everyone else to make sure that this will happen. And the fruits of your labor will actually benefit people, because after all, the work that we do is supported by the US government and by philanthropic organizations, and it's our obligation to make sure that we do our job right and we benefit patients. So what we do is we engineer proteins. I'm passionate about what we're doing. I'm fortunate that because somebody is paying me to do what I'm doing. Never, ever in my wildest dreams, I would have thought that I would be doing now what I'm doing. In fact, when I thought about myself when I was your age, the only thing I could think of what would be like in my 50s, I felt that I will have a beard. That was about the depth and the height of my ambition. So obviously I do not have a beard. I tried it. It didn't work very well. It was scratchy. So the future is ahead of you. There are fascinating opportunities here. This is an amazing university. And I'm not saying this because, again, you're here, you're my audience, but because my own daughter was considering a university to go to, and she was accepted at Cornell, which was my alma mater. Now, she visited Ithaca and she said, where is the city? And why is it so cold? And after that, she said, I'm going to Texas. And she's graduating from Texas, and I'm a very proud father of another Longhorn. She's finishing this year. And by the way, her favorite and most amazing professor, and it's all true, is Dr. Iverson, who I'm sure you know, can make organic chemistry fun. I don't know how that can happen, but he's the only one who can do it. Thank you.
That was great. That was great. Dr. Noël Busch-Armendariz. Professor Busch-Armendariz has over 2 decades of experience in working to end violence against women and their children, and she has worked as a battered women's advocate, support group leader, program director, and registered lobbyist. She has traveled extensively throughout the world and has lived and worked in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, Romania, Albania, South Korea, and most recently in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. She has served as an expert witness in nearly 4 dozen criminal, civil, and immigration cases involving domestic violence and sexual assault, and co-directs a national training on how to be an ethical and effective expert witness. Dr. Armendariz.
Welcome to the 40 acres. I think I have the toughest lineup here. Not only are these three men brilliant, you didn't get to hear Dean Iverson's bio, but he really is a brilliant member of this faculty. But I'm also, if Dr. George had gotten a hold of that weed, I'm gonna kill that buzz that he would have gotten. Because I'm getting ready to talk about the nexus of iPhones, ice cream, and illicit sex as it relates to my research agenda on human trafficking, which is an interesting segue, actually, from our first speaker. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What I've come to find out in my work in this area after 17 years being at UT is that iPhones have a mineral that is produced by slave labor, that sometimes the ice cream that we buy on the streets is pushed by somebody who is enslaved. And that in one case that I've worked with police here in Austin, we had a UT student who was being sold on the internet for sex. And so the buzzkill is that the nexus of this is that it affects all our lives. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that. But I'm going to be one of those presenters that asked you to take out your phones and use it, not just for Twitter, but to go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and put in this event number, 1073. We're going to do some polling. And I'm going to ask McKenna to put up the first polling. Let's practice. Okay, so the first polling question, this is a practice. So it's slido.com, event number 1073, and you're to answer this question. I enjoy ice cream. Do you? Yes, I indulge. And I hope after this lecture I don't have to give up ice cream. Yes, it reminds me of my childhood. Or no, I don't indulge because I've heard about the freshman 15 and I choose to gain my calories somewhere else. And we are not going to ask you about where you choose those calories from. Okay, you guys are getting a hang of the polling. So keep Slido out. I'm going to ask you a couple of times during the lecture about to engage with me. And I don't know if we can keep that up. McKenna's back there doing the technology for me. So let me talk about wicked questions for a minute. I was reading something by David Williamson, who said the difference between good leaders and great leaders are the ability to ask wicked questions. And he characterized wicked questions by this. He said, wicked questions are questions in which they provoke and stimulate thought. They ask courageous questions that disrupt the status quo. And while I thought about this in the context of research, I thought that's exactly right. I also thought it in the context of asking questions about human trafficking. Because not only does human trafficking have to ask questions that are courageous, because human trafficking doesn't ask questions really about is it okay? Should we stop it? Because I think most of us in this audience, right, in this auditorium would agree we should stop it. It asks questions about what should the punishment of traffickers be? Or how do we develop tools so law enforcement can investigate it better? Those are the wicked questions that our research tries to ask and answer for us to get better, to make impact, to do translational research here at UT. And so that's what we tried to do. So this is what happened to us. The first case of human trafficking was, came in front of us in Central Texas about 12 years ago. I've been a researcher here for 17 years. And it was a case of domestic minor sex trafficking. 3 young girls were brought across the Texas border and sold as sex slaves. And we really did not know what to do about helping them. And so one of the wicked questions that we had to answer was, how do we respond to them? But before we answered that question, we wanted to ask the question about law enforcement tools. One of the questions that we're answering right now for the state legislature is, what's the extent of the problem and what does it cost us? So right now I'm going to ask you to answer another polling question, I hope. Oh, what was that? I have no idea. That seemed like a wicked question. Okay, so let me ask you this wicked question, much more appropriate. I don't know where that one came from. So I want to ask you if you have any sense of where modern-day slavery might situate itself in terms of the global economy. And of course, I mean the illegal global economy. So take your guess in terms of where it ranks, first, second, or third, with firearms and drugs. It actually ranks second. It's overtaken the sale of firearms in terms of our economy. It's a $150 billion economy today. One of the questions that we are answering, one of the wicked questions we are answering for the state of Texas is, by December, we'll be able to tell the state legislature what the impact is in the state of Texas on our economy. We'll also be able to tell the state of Texas how many people are impacted, so how many victims we have in the state of Texas that are affected by human trafficking. But one of the things I want to go back to around, oh, thank you, I think McKenna did that for me, she's keeping up. One of the things I want to go back to is talking about what wicked questions do to us in terms of the disruption of humanity. I think it gets to our very core. This issue gets to our very core of who we are as people today. We signed the Proclamation Emancipation 150 years ago, and most of us would not believe that trafficking still exists, that modern-day slavery still exists. And so that's why we have to answer the question of, what are the actual numbers today? What does it cost us? And in order to do that, we might actually have to back up, because we need to tell law enforcement, we need to help law enforcement be able to figure out, how do you investigate it? And so that's actually where we started our journey. We started our journey with the idea of helping law enforcement figure out who the traffickers were and how they exploited victims. And what developed out of that was a set of typologies of traffickers. And what we found was that traffickers exploited people for two reasons. And this wasn't just our work, but a whole body of literature that told us this, but we did this in a confirmatory way. People were exploited for the purposes of sex, but they were also exploited for the purposes of labor. So people were exploited in order to mine, in order to for construction, at nail salons, on big ships, cruises, that sort of thing. And this is particularly important for the state of Texas with the amount of labor that we are engaged in. So our last polling question, I hope. There we go. So tell me how dependent you are on your iPhone. And for those that are Android users, I've got a response for you. Because I'm an Android user, actually. I love this millennial generation. I mean, most of us know that our iPhones, our tablets, our computers, our Androids, right? They are not just accessories. They are the gateways to what we do, right? We need those. We've asked you twice in this lecture to take them out and to use them. And so it's really important. So 47, oh, I love this, 31% no big thing. So maybe we'll ask you to put it away when you're in lecture. We'll see how many of that holds up. Can't use your computers during class. But what we know is, what we found out through our answering some questions. Let me see if I can. This is how, when you ask the wicked question of what mining does, or how the nexus of human trafficking relates to us, how it lives in our life is, the things that we know about human trafficking from the research is that in the DRC, a part of Eastern Africa, that because of the war there, that children were used to mine a particular, two particular minerals that together forms this coltan, which is used in every single product that we use that is electronic. Not only electronic, but also in our cars. And so whether we think we're involved in human trafficking, or the production, or the consuming of slave products, we are. And so that was a really important question for us to answer in terms of what we did as researchers. So part of what we did is redefine the image of human trafficking. So this is actually what it looks like, and this is what evidence or empirical work or research will bring you. It'll bring you an image like this that actually brings it home. Real numbers, real people, and real pictures of what that ice cream looks like, what illicit sex looks like. And eventually, these numbers will be more precise in December when we actually can tell the legislature what the economy of human trafficking is in the state of Texas. But what I don't want us to do is think we're going to give up our iPhone products. So what do we do about that? And what can you do about that as students? There's actually a lot going on, because research is only as good as it is to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that you have heard that from the first two speakers. There is a lot going on both on campus, in Central Texas, and in the nation to actually eradicate human trafficking or modern-day slavery. In Central Texas, there's an organization called Allies. If you want to find out how many slaves work for you by the products that you buy today, you can go to slaveryfootprint.com and take a quick online survey just based on the products that you buy. And the US Department of Labor now has a way that you can track buying products that are known to be produced slave-free. Because what we know is that we probably, let's see if I can do one more jump forward. There we go. What we probably know is that we're not going to give up our iPhones. But what we do want to know is what starts here, what you can do as a freshman who is an engineering major, a music major, a social work major, an undeclared major, a UGS major, is that you can make informed decisions that are informed by research, and you indeed can make a difference, because what starts here changes the world.